Good morning. Continuing our journey in Hemshech Samach Vav, we are on page 26. The end of the paragraph on page 26. And what the Rebbe Rashab explained in this section here, and just the whole flow. So we've been discussing about the journey of a soul, which really is the journey of each one of us, both in this world and also in what happens after 120 years, talking about before Mashiach's coming, how the soul continues to travel. So we've now established that there's part of the journey is like rungs of a ladder that are commensurate to each other. And there, one level leads to the next level, what he called ad va'ad b'chlal, until and including. Then there is a journey when you're dealing with that's in the world of gvul, in the infrastructure of existence, where everything is a defined level. So one level leads to the next, like he gave the examples from the growth in seichel. One idea, one comprehension leads to a deeper comprehension, and so on. But then when you're dealing with Elokus, Ein Sof, that's L'mayla M'seder Ishtalshlus, what he called Sevav Kalalman, now we're already in the domain of Bligvul. So here the levels are also non-commensurate to each other. They're completely different paradigms. And one level doesn't just lead into the next level. You need another ingredient. So it's ad v'loyad b'chlal. It's until but not including. So what's an extra ingredient that's needed? Bittul. You need to be mavatal. You need to somewhat nullify, erase, forget, strip, suspend, divest. We use many, many terms. The lower level in order to enter into a whole new paradigm, because if you don't do that, you're still an extension of the lower level to some extent, and actually will confuse you because it's a different way of thinking. It's a different perspective. But here's more than just thinking, it's a different consciousness. It's a different paradigm of consciousness. So that's the second approach, which has been something we've been discussing all the way around. And that's what you find in Gan Eden, the different levels from one Gan Eden to the next. You need the Nahar Denur, which burns away the fiery river, that burns away the previous perspective. And then comes the Amud, the pillar that helps you absorb the higher divine consciousness, higher divine paradigm. So using the language of some of what we learned, so when it comes to the Gvul, there one level leads to the next. But when it comes to Bligvul, and especially Atzmus, he says specifically, Koshken legabe Atzmus, that as high as you get, you're never going to reach the ultimate. And on the contrary, some Giluyim that beginners Gvul, you do reach one level to the next, but not in Atzmus. On the contrary, the higher you go, the more wondrous, the more awesome you recognize what Atzmus is like. And that's how he concluded the paragraph. He said, Yovan Yeser Eich Shamitis Atzmus Nifel Legami, Ve'ena Begedi Yediyah V'Asoga Klal L'Klal. So the higher you go, the more you realize that it's not even altogether even in the domain of intelligence. Not just one intelligence doesn't lead to a higher one. You're talking about something that's completely beyond that all. The Amitis idea about Flosa Atzmus, he says, is Dafke b'misha esik b'yediyah madregas anailis. And then he added, the one who's to experience really that divine, awesome grandeur, if you wish, or wonder, is only someone who really is busy with and immersed in understanding what he calls esik b'yediyas madregas anailis shebe'erein sav baruch hu. Someone who's involved, that delves into understanding the highest levels of Ein Sof. That's what leads you to appreciate how much Atzmus is completely beyond that. He doesn't know. He won't perceive it. It'll only be in a form of amunah. He'll believe. You believe that God is beyond everything. So it's interesting, he's using the word yedeya on something that's beyond yediyah. It's like he doesn't say the expression, but sometimes it says "Tachlis hayediyah shalei neda, shalei nedeacha," that the ultimate of knowing is that you know that you don't know. So usually that comes to a simple explanation of that is the more you know, the more you realize how much more there is to know. But then there's a deeper explanation. The more you know the unknowable. You begin to perceive actually something that's unknowable. And yes, it's not on the terms of conventional knowledge, but it doesn't mean it's pure faith. It means that your knowledge has led you to a place that's beyond the usual parameters of knowledge. I mean, I was giving examples with indeterminism, only an example. You can't compare it at all to Atzmus, but it's an example of how one paradigm leads you to a place where you have to completely suspend that paradigm of deterministic physics in order to experience or perceive indeterministic. And it's perception, it's not faith. They do perceive it. It's still amazing and it's still paradoxical and has many questions, but you realize that there are things that are, your mind tells you there are things that are beyond the mind, and there are other ways of experiencing it, but knowing it's a fact, just as rational determinism is a fact. So that's just as an example. And that's where we stopped, end of the paragraph on page 26. Good. So now, just to give it more context, just to remember where we're going with this and where we start. So on the bottom of page 24, this all began when the Rebbe Rashab said, "Ubir Inyan," he's coming to explain the difference between La'asad Lave, when there be the Gili of Atzmus, and Ayin Loirosa, and Eden itself. And today it's only Gan Eden, the river, only a reflection. So he said, to explain that, let us discuss Meshubach Umefor Ade Ad Shmei HaGodel, the Adeyad, that one interpretation that it's Nitzchias, it's forever, it's endless. Why? Because Shmei HaGodel is Erein Sof, so it's endless. The praise of Shmei HaGodel is endless, unlike praises that are a finite and defined entities where there the praise has a limit. And the second explanation is ad kan, meaning boundary, limit. And he explained that in ad, you have ad v'lo ad b'chlal and ad v'ad b'chlal. That was the context and the flow. And it's dependent and it's interdependent, because the mere fact that it is endless tells you it's ad v'lo ad b'chlal. That's why ad is a limit, not a limit because you're talking about the finite, but because it's so beyond. So you realize that as far as you'll go, you'll always be limited. You always go that far. You can't go. There's always levels that are beyond you. That's the context of how we got to where we are right now. So in other words, the ad of ad shmoy mufur adei ad is talking about ad v'loyad. Ad v'ad would not be included in that because that's already a level that is finite, and we're not talking about finite. We're talking about shmei hagadol. Okay, so with that, I'm ready to continue. Unless somebody wants to ask something about what I just reviewed, let it continue on page 26.
You just said that we're talking about ad shmo hagadol, and of course it's not. It's ad velo ad. I heard exactly what you said, but I thought we were talking about Atzmus, and there is a tiny difference, at least slight difference between shmo hu v'shmo. Because of course we talked about that extensively in Ayin Base, but it's obvious his name is not him.
I didn't say Shema Gadol was Atzmus. I was saying it's Eir and Sof. But in Eir and Sof, it's Ad V'Lo as well.
Of course. No, but what is infinitely far from the Shema, no matter how far the Shema elevates?
Both Atzmus and Eir and Sof are applicable.
And the reason why you're saying Or Ein Sof is Or, because you can see the Or, but we can't see the Helem. I mean, is there a reason why you switch?
We're not talking about Helem right now. We're talking about Eir and Sof. Eir Ein Sof as opposed to Gvul. A Gvul has parameters, and one level leads you into the next level. In Eir Ein Sof, one level does not lead you, and you need to have the pillar, you need to have the interface, the bittel, to go to that next level.
Yes,
and
I understand. Sure,
that's the case with Atzmus.
Again, I'm not saying you're doing anything wrong. I'm trying to explain my lack of comprehension.
Is Eir Ein Sof.
Right, and Ein Sof is Atzmus, Or versus
no, Eir Ein Sof is not Atzmus.
I didn't say that. I didn't say that. Or Ein Sof hold on. Or Ein Sof is Shmo Hagadol and Ein Sof is Atzmus. Is that what you're saying?
No, I didn't say. I didn't use the word Ein Sof on Atzmus. Atzmus is Atzmus.
I know, but it's not Shmo.
So who says it is? I said it's not Shmo God.
Okay, well, I'll drop it. But you keep switching between the two and
No,
discussing.
because he said Ein Sof is Ad V'Lo, and even more so, Kolshkein for sure. Atzmus is Ad V'Lo.
Okay, thank you. All right,
That the Rebbe Rashab said that clearly on page 26.
Okay, thank you. That you answered my question. Sorry for all the back and forth. Thank you.
So to continue the new paragraph on page 26, V'zehu the kol masha elen anashamas began min badregel yenu yeser b'bchinas ha'ara deir ein sof. And now he's going back to Gan Eden. Remember, Gan Eden, as high as it is still a reflection of Eir Ein Sof. It's not Eden itself. It's not Ayin Le'Rasa. The river flows from Eden, and it's Gan be'Eden. It's the Gan within Eden, like we learned Bina, etc. So he says now, with the souls that ascend and elevate in Gan Eden, in a higher level, which is all the level of Ha'ara of Eir Ein Sof, Yeser Yifla Mehem B'chinas Amitis Ha'atzmus. The higher they elevate, based on the principle we just said, that the higher you go, the more wondrous and the more awesome. I'm sure there are other words you can use as well. Is the experience of godliness, Amitis Ha'atzmus. So that's indeed exactly what's happening to the neshamas in Gan Eden. So neshamas in Gan Eden, the higher they climb, kol masha elin, to higher levels. It's all in the ha'ara of Eir Ein Sof. It's still in the ha'ara, but they climb higher and higher. So the higher they go, Yesher Yifla, the more wondrous mehem b'chinas amitis ha'atzmus is the truth of Atzmus. So in other words, the truth of Atzmus can be understood on many levels. A 5-year-old could also have some inkling that God is beyond. But obviously someone who's learned a lot of Chassidus. And here we're talking about the neshama that's elevated now beyond the body and the animal soul and is now in the Gan Eden. The higher it climbs, the more it experiences that the wonder of the amitis of Atzmus, as he's using the word amitis. And it's an interesting word because he's basically telling us the real reality, like he says, amitis himotzai. The Rambam says right at the beginning of Hilchus Yesodei Torah, he says, Yesodei Yesodes, Yesodei Yesodes v'amud ha'chochmes, Leda sheyesh hamotzei rishon. He says, Hu amitis himotzai. The ultimate true reality. Even though existence was also real because God created it, but it doesn't have any ultimate essential truth, only the truth that the Creator invested in it. Whereas amitis himotzei, amitis ha'atzmus. But that itself can be understood on many levels, and the higher you go, the more you are, more you're yifla mehem is the one usually words. Uboim yesi leid bitla asaga. And the more they come to a level of bitla asaga, because the more you realize how Atzmus is completely beyond, the more the bitl of whatever you do understand, you come to even have more bitl, more nullification of it, or more suspension of it, and more divestiture of that level that you have. And what is it that you're coming to understand? How the amitis ha'atzmus, there the bitl hasaga, whatever comprehension you have, will be nullified in that presence, legamri mekol v'kol, completely, utterly, unequivocally. So he's tying it all together back to what the neshamas are actually experiencing as they go higher and higher. Now, obviously, a neshama that is in Gan Eden on a lower level, and you could even say the levels that we talked before were levels of gvul. He didn't really talk about gvul in Gan Eden, but you have to say that there's also levels that are commensurate to each other. So there you don't even need the bittul of the ultimate bittul. You still need bittul, and every climbing, every journey needs some. You must lose the previous level to gain the next level. But what he's talking now is obviously the bigger paradigm shifts. And the higher you go, the more awesome. So it's not that the higher you go, the closer you get to the destination. The closer you get, the more awesome it is. So basically, awe is really the experience of appreciating the amitis of Atzmus. We usually think in terms, the closer I get to something, the more I contain it. But that's only in the area where there's gvul, or even if it's bli gvul, but it's still on your terms. When you're dealing with Atzmus, it's the exact opposite. The more awesome it becomes. That's what he's essentially saying right now. Okay. Which is understood from what we read earlier, but now he's spelling it out even further, so it really drives the point home. Any questions before I read the parentheses? And now he's going to add one more interesting point, because we've already learned at length, relatively, that, like with Rab Zera, that he forgot the methodology of Talmud Bavli to be able to gain and absorb the methodology of Talmud Yerushalmi. We learned the examples in davening, in learning Torah, and many different examples he gave about the seed deteriorating in order to give birth to a new entity, to a new plant, to a tree, to blossom into something new. So that was all examples of how a lower level of asaga, a lower level of perception and comprehension needs to be lost in order to absorb a higher level of comprehension. But he's going to add now, and that what he's saying now is even more than that. The idea of amitis atzmus is more than just the bittul from Gan Eden Atach to Gan Eden Elyon, for example, or from Elam Hazah to Gan Eden Atach. That's what he's going to add now. He says, Levad zeh shem is batel mehem, behem, hasaga mitzad madrega atzma she'elim ba. So in addition, or beyond, besides that fact, besides the fact, or in addition to, that this neshamas, as they elevate, the hasaga they have, but due to the higher level that they've reached, and they're absorbed into a higher level, so they lose the lower hasaga, ukiyadua, the b'chol madrega shi al yena yeser, as it's known that every level that is higher level, hari hasogi b'chinas afshata yeser. So he's explaining something we learned earlier, but he's with more oisis, with more explanation. He says, so the higher you go, more the comprehension is more abstract. It's stripped from the definitions of that same comprehension on a lower level. And more ethereal and more sublime of the hasaga. So just to use an example, I'm going to use the example of an example. When you're teaching a beginner student, when I say beginner, I don't necessarily mean a child, but someone that needs examples. You can't just explain, let's say, Atzilus or the Esesphiris as they are in their pure pristine form. So you use an example. Just like, for example, we have 10 faculties within us. These faculties evolved from the 10 spheres in Atzilus, and then to Atzilus to Bria. So the faculties become the working example that allows us to understand what the spheres of Atzilus are. But once you have mastered it to some extent, then the example is not so necessary. It's still a good example. But then when someone says that's the spheres of Atzilus, you've gotten so used to it, you say, these are the 10 divine attributes. They are not as tangible as the faculties that I have, but that's where they're rooted. And now you're talking about the 10 faculties of Atzilus, or the 10 attributes of Atzilus, in a way that's much more hafshata and much more ruchnius. That's just a small, simple example. Is this a paradigm shift of bittul and so on? Yes, to some extent, yes, because you've stripped it away from the physical example, the example of faculties, which relatively speaking is mipsari echzalaka. It's from my flesh. It's something I experience. And now you're talking about it on a much more divine level. And the same, you can go higher and higher and higher. So what he's saying here is, in explaining the bitla hasaga of a lower level when it's being absorbed into a higher level, so till now we've been talking about that you need to be mevatlit, like Rabbi Zera with Talmud Bavli and Talmud Yerushalmi. But now he's saying that when you go higher, so levad zeis shem is batl mem hasaga mitzad madrega atzma she'elim ba, that the madrega itself that you've reached now, we're not talking about the awesomeness of the wonder of Atzmus that you're appreciating more than ever. We're talking about how one hasaga has a higher level of hasaga, has created a bitl of the hasaga, of the comprehension of a lower level, because it's much more like ukiyadua, because it's much more hafshata yeser, more abstract, and much more beruchnius, less tangible, less corporeal, if you wish. Umamela b'madrega al yena de erein sof. Umamela b'madrega sal yena is the erein sof. Umamela, the same applies that the higher levels of erein sof. Hari hayidiyah v'asoga shami betachlis hafshata. There, the idea and the asoga, the perception, the understand, the perceiving of it, and the comprehension of it is tachlis hafshata, utterly abstract, meaning it doesn't have any real handles that were necessary on lower levels. You're understanding it in its pure form, without, again, any of its. The opposite of hafshata is halbasha. Halbasha means when you dress it up in garments, which usually is examples, explanations, in a way to make it more understandable to a person who needs those handles, so to speak. But when you're getting to the highest levels, he says it's utterly abstract. To the point that you don't even call it hasaga mamish. Now, what does he mean by that? It means, because hasaga is usually, when you comprehend something, it usually means because you understand the details, you understand its structure. It's what we call the form. But when you get to the abstract part, it's something far higher than the form. I'm going to give an example from a letter from the Rebbe, a beautiful example. But let me just finish the parentheses. And this is what it means, that when you're when you elevate to higher levels of Erein Sof, you're a state of bitl hasaga, because it's not hasaga mamish. Now, it's not just the bitl, in other words, it's not just the nullification or the stripping of comprehension on a lower level to have comprehension on a higher level. He's adding now, it's actually not mamish hasaga when you go to the higher levels of Ur, and you're not so much involved with the kalim. And of course, the higher you go, the more you have that. So all this is levadzos. This is not what he's addressing before the parenthesis. Before the parenthesis, he's talking about the higher you go, the more you appreciate the haflah, the wonder and the awesome wonder of Atzmus, of amitis of Atzmus. Says besides the fact that the hasaga itself that you are growing in is also getting higher and higher as you get absorbed into higher levels. So it's like two things are happening here when a person climbs and ascends to the higher levels. But let me first explain a bit, what does this mean? Because earlier you could say, okay, Talmud Yerushalmi, for example, is a much higher form methodology like Ur Yashar than Talmud Bavli. As we discussed, Talmud Bavli, its primary methodology is questions, answers, arguments, counter-arguments, pilpul, a lot of pilpul, a lot of discussion, back and forth, back and forth. You're really working your way from the bottom up. You begin with many questions. You begin with confusion. Machshakim Heshivani, the Gemara says, in darkness you have dwelled. Is that Talmud Bavli? Why? Because you start with darkness. The Mishnah says so and so. The Tanoim and the Amoraim begin to discuss what does it mean, and there's a contradiction from another place, and there's a counter contradiction, and then someone comes and gives a different theory. It's all working your way, trying to crystallize the clarity, but it's coming from darkness, essentially, from questions and answers. The methodology of Talmud Yerushalmi is Ur Yashar. That's Ur Chayzer, Talmud Bavli. Ur Chayzer. Talmud Yerushalmi is far the other direction. You begin with a clarity, and then you explain that clarity. It also has questions, but it's not quite at all. In Bavli, it's very different. So Rabbi Zera wanted to assume a new form of methodology, so he fasted. That's the classic example he gave earlier of a bittul of asaga, a lower level of asaga, to get to a higher level of asaga. But that's not bittul asaga. That's the bittul of the methodology of Yerushalmi. Of Bavli, in order to assume the methodology of Yerushalmi. Here he's saying something more, that it's actually more hafshata and more ruchnius. So I want to explain what that means. It's not a contradiction, it's just additional understanding of this topic. So there's a very interesting letter that the Rebbe, someone asked the Rebbe, Samach Vav actually, I think it's a little later, we'll probably we'll come to it later. that it says in Samach Vav, it expresses seichel and ur ha-seichel. And he wants to know what's the difference between seichel and ur ha-seichel. You'll see it often in Chassidus. You'll see both these things. Seichel and ur ha-seichel. And so the Rebbe gives an example, which I think fits very well here as well. He takes an idea from the Talmud, from the Gemara. The idea is, there's halacha. Moide b'mikzas chayev shvua. If Reuven comes to Shimon and says, you owe me $1,000, and Shimon says, I only owe you $500. So how do you resolve that? So the halacha is chayev shvua. Shimon has to swear, and say, I swear on the Torah and Ashta Hashem that I only owe him $500. There's no court case. That's enough. Why? Because he's moide b'miktzas, and so that is the seichel. What is a level of eira seichel? What's the reason? What's the logic behind it? Why not sit and hear the evidence from both sides? Why are you assuming? Why are you giving him the benefit of the doubt? Because he swore. So the Gemara explains, because ein adam meiz panav b'fnei bal chevei. Because the nature of a human being is that he will not be chutzpahdik to someone that he owes money to. In other words, if Shimon said, I don't owe you anything, it's a whole different story. Now you have a real disagreement and you have to figure it out, and there you do need to sit like in a din Torah and bring witnesses and evidence, etc. But since he admitted it, it means I admit that I owe you. So he won't have the chutzpah to lie, because he's a Baal Chayv. Since he admits that I owe you money, so the Gemara says, give him a shvua, and that we trust that he wouldn't be, because that's the nature of a human being. I know people ask the question, what do you mean? We know people who are liars, who don't say 1,000, they say 500, and they don't, and they do owe 1,000. So the derech hatzachus, in a humorous way, the answer is because he's not an Adam. Ein Adam meiz panav. You have to be a mensch. A mensch, a general human being, menschlichkeit, dictates that you're not going to be chutzpahdik to someone that did you a favor. The people who are, means they're lacking the Adam part. But that's an aside. That's not the point I want to make here. So the Rebbe goes further. What's taka the reason a person does not have chutzpah to someone they owe a favor to? So the Rebbe says, because of the edelkeit of the neshama. That's the Rebbe's words. The refinement of a human soul is such. People are wired a certain way. There's a certain natural edelkeit. In Yiddish, edelkeit is like refinement. There's a certain natural adinut in Hebrew. A certain kindness, a certain sensitivity. The people are not just callous and so on. The fact that people can develop it is not the nature of a human being. It's because, like I said, they've unfortunately lost some of their menschlichkeit, their adam. So what am I pointing out? What does the Rebbe say? It says the difference in seichel and ur ha-seichel, the seichel is the moide b'mikzas. The halacha is the seichel. The logic of it is that a person, or the statement is, a person who moide b'mikzas, he acknowledges partially that he owes, so he only has to take an oath. And why? There's a seichel behind that, because a person doesn't show chutzpah. The ur ha-seichel is the more abstract nature of it. It teaches you about the nature of a human being. So I'm applying that here, that when you learn a seichel on a lower level, you can understand its parameters, understand the rules and so on. But the higher you go, and I'm not saying it's a perfect example for such a high paradigm shift, but it's a good example to show how something is more hafshatadik on a deeper level. When you go higher, you go deeper into the subject, you see it's you're understanding a little more sublime, like he says, more ruchnius, more hafshata. It's the edelkeit of a soul is not necessarily manifest only in this halacha. It's talking to you about the human nature. I want to give another example from the Rogatchover. Anyone familiar with the Rogatchover? Rabbi Yosef Rosen was one of the great geniuses. He called him a ilui, a prodigy of the 20th century. He lived at the same time. He passed away in the 50s, I believe. He was the Rebbe had communicated with him. The Rebbe was very big, so-called advocate, and would quote the Rogatchover very often. The Rogatchover was known. Everything he wrote was very brief, But what he really was machadish in his way of learning was he was able to strip halachas from their structure and get to the core essence of what the real issue is. And when you do that, you get mamish into the afshata, stripped from the details. I'll give one example. There are many examples, but I'll give one. Let's take the example of time, the nature of time. So there's a shaila in halacha, there's a shaila in the Gemara, if a person, God forbid, desecrated Shabbos. So the question is Shabbos desecrated forever, till the end of Shabbos? Meaning, once you desecrated Shabbos, there's no Shabbos anymore for you? Or no? Or you have to continue keeping Shabbos, even if you desecrated, someone did something, Chilul Shabbos, let's say, a certain moment. We're not getting now whether, but Shabbos continues for them. So the Ragged Shover asks, what's the difference in opinion? What are they arguing about? There has to be a logic behind this argument. So he says that logic is the question of time. Is time made of particles, or is time a wave? Is it one flow? In other words, Shabbos from the beginning to the end is one entity. So once you desecrated 1 minute, the rest of it is also now desecrated. Or is Shabbos renewed every moment, is another sacred moment of Shabbos. So the Kedusha of Shabbos is not affected a minute later by what happened a minute before. And then he brings many halachas where with this logic, what time is can affect Sfira Sa'emer, the laws of Nida, many things where the Torah talks about time, he applies the concept. What do you see from this? The specific seichel, like he's saying here, the halbasha of it, is the law about Shabbos. But the hafshata, when you go deeper into the seichel of it, you're getting into a whole other discussion. What is time? The nature of time. And now you're stripped it from this particular application, and you could apply that same logic to other laws that have nothing to do with Shabbos. And there are many, many examples like this. Classic examples, the machlekes between Shammai and Hillel. So we know today that this is explained by many, that Shammai and Hillel are consistent in their disagreements. Shammai generally goes by potential b'koyach, and Hillel always goes by b'poel, like Hanukkah. Coming from Hanukkah, Hillel says you light one candle the first night of Hanukkah, then two, then three, because you go by the miracle every day was added, you add two. Shammai talks about potential. Since day one, it already has the potential to burn for 8 days, you light 8 days. And this agreement of koyach and poel applies to so many areas. For example, Chamish Asar B'Shvat, the Rosh Hashanah of trees. So Beis Hillel says it's on the 15th of Shvat. And that halach is like Beis Hillel, like in most cases. Beis Shammai says it's Rosh Chodesh Shvat. What's the machlekes? It's a machlekes of Metzias. I mean, which one is it? When do trees begin to blossom? So Shammai says as soon as the seed is beginning to, something emerges, even though you don't really fully see it, but b'koyach now, it begins on the first day of Shvat. Beis Hillel says, no, we have to wait till there's more actualization. That's the 15th of. Just examples, but when bottom line, it goes back to what is more powerful. What do we look at? The potential, or we look at the actual? I just wanted to give some examples, since he's not giving examples of a seichel that is more, more tangible, and one that gets more stripped of the tangible application, but you get to the more conceptual and more abstract and ethereal nature of the idea. Is it exact example for this? Not necessarily, because everything I said was more in our world. Here we're talking about Eirei and Sof, but it does explain that in Elokus itself, you can experience the divine in terms that you can relate to. Someone else who's reached a higher level, or you yourself, when you climb higher, you start experiencing the divine on a more abstract level that doesn't have quite the same qualities, same quite parameters and definitions that you would have in a lower level. But this is all one aspect of the aliyah of the neshamas. In addition to that, there's the higher it goes, it also, that's the levadzos, it also experiences the wonder of Atzmus on a much, much higher level. So that we're going to get back now to where we're learning here. But I'll stop now if anybody wants to ask anything about anything I just said. Okay. So now comes another parenthesis. after the first parentheses, and he qualifies what we just said. Remember, all this we've been discussing is today. Neshamas and Gan Eden and their elevations and journey, today it's in a way that they remain, the ayin lo yirah, and Eden itself remains elusive, because you go higher, the higher you go, the more awesome you recognize the wonder, but you don't contain it. What about la'ased love? Earlier we said clearly a few times that la'ased love, everything changes. That there's an experience of ayin lo yirah, that which is not perceptible today, Eden itself, what he called the tainuga atzmi aposhet, that will be experienced la'ased love. So the parenthesis comes to qualify what that means. Because you could say, 1 second, since Atzmus always remains infinitely beyond, and the higher you go, the more you recognize the awesome wonder of the Amitis Atzmus, so the la'ased love, will that change? Good question, right? So he's going to address that right now. So he says, V'rak la'asid, only in the future, Yizgala b'chinas ha'atzmus, v'yir b'chinas ha'saga. Okay, in case you thought you got your head wrapped around this, he said, but only la'asid, not today, but la'asid, Atzmus will be revealed, and it'll be in a state of asaga. Till now, he's saying it's not asaga. On the contrary, the higher you go, the more you realize how it's beyond any comprehension. But now he's saying that it'll be u'kamosh kosav Mashiach. So he's bringing, in addition to what he brought earlier about ayin lo yirah, he's bringing now proofs of this new level of experience that will be la'ased love. Kamosh kosav Mashiach. It talks about Mashiach. It says, "Hine yaskil avdi v'yorim ma'od." There's a pasuk in Yeshaya, I believe it is. Yeah, we say this, I think, in the Haftarah of Achrosh Pesach. So it says about Mashiach, Hine yaskil avdi, my servant, meaning Mashiach, will be yaskil. He'll be maskil. He'll be understanding. The yorim, and there's a whole lot of v'yigova ma'od, and he'll be exalted ma'od, very much so. So the Rebbe Rashab is bringing this as a proof that there'll be a whole new level of comprehension Mashiach will have. Sheti haskola b'madreges hayeser nailis. That the haskola, yaskil, the conception and understanding, well, it doesn't say in Hasagi, it says yaskil, will be in the highest levels. Uksiv, haskil v'yadua oisi. Oisi. That you will conceive and know me. When you say oisi, you mean oisi like Atzmus. Like we say in Rosh Hashanah, a taste of this. V'yoda kol pol ki ata pa'alte. Every action will know the creative force that created that action. So every pole, every product will know the producer. Yoda kol pol, every product, yeah, ato palta, that you produced it. That means we will see and perceive and comprehend and understand within existence the creative force within it. How that's a raya, I'm not sure, because you could argue maybe that's mamala kalam, that is like koyach hapoel benifel of the divine energy that's within Ur or Rekia and so on. But he is saying, comparing it to la'ased love. So we'll see. Let's see how he explains it. The oz yeh b'chinas hadas v'hasaga. I think what he means to say is that when we say Rosh Hashanah, yeah, it could be on a lower level, but la'ased love yoda kol pa'al kate pa'alta will be on the highest level. Ata pa'alta, that will perceive the ultimate creative force within it, not just a limited creative force. That's how I would initially explain it. But bottom line, he's definitely talking about a whole new level. La'ased love. And continuing, the oz then in the future, b'chinas hadas v'hasaga, the perception, the perceiving, and the hasaga, and the comprehension, b'chinas reimamus ha'atzmus, the atzmus ein sof. Says it very clearly. Will be in the exaltedness and the grandeur and the majesty of Atzmus, of Atzmus Ein Sof. So this is the qualification. He doesn't explain. He just says everything we're saying is not La'asad Love. La'asad Love is a whole different story. So we, of course, need an explanation. How do you explain La'asad Love? I know when I began reading the parentheses, it seemed like I was suggesting the Rebbe Rashab was going to explain it, but he didn't explain it. We will discuss it. Obviously, big part of Samach Vav is all about this. But right now, all he wanted to do was qualify. He said what we said till now, that the higher you go, the more you recognize. The neshamas in Gan Eden, the higher they go, the more they recognize, appreciate the awesome wonder of Atzmus Ein Sof, and that is beyond Hasaga. He made it clear, Bitl Hasaga legamri makol v'kol. And then again he said, Ein b'chinas Hasaga mamish, etc. That's all today. L'asad Love, there will be Hasaga in Atzmus, which is absolute paradox based on what we're learning. But that's the chiddush of L'asad Love, that after all the Aveda that we go through, all these thousands of years of refining, there'll be not just that we will recognize that Atzmus is beyond, that we'll have a comprehension in it, which is not today is not achievable. That's what he's saying here. Now, how we will have such a comprehension, we've talked about in the past. I will explain it, but I don't want to go right now into it because it's a whole discussion of its own. I'll just suffice by saying the following. Initially, a gvul like us, a mortal, finite creature, can even contain bligvul, as we've been learning. However, we were given the ability to contain bligvul because we have a neshama and God gave us access. And through our avodah, especially bittul, we can reach even bligvul and we can keep climbing higher and higher. That's one thing. And the higher you climb, the more you experience higher levels, new paradigms with more bittul. And the higher you climb, the more bittul there is, because the more you recognize how Atzmus is completely beyond. But then there's another thing. Just like Atzmus can give us a taste of bligvul, can also give us a taste of Atzmus. And that's really the ultimate, but only after Aveda. That will not come throughout Bizman Hazeh. After the entire Aveda, and we finish the Birurim, and we make a Dir B'Tachtenim for Atzmus, that Atzmus is comfortable in this world, not just revelations of Atzmus. Atzmus itself finds this world as a dir Eloi Yisbarach, in the fullest sense of a permanent fashion, then things will shift. Not because of a miracle, but because we have become so saturated with Elikus, that Elikus is now radiating through us. We're like a transparent channels of it. And part of that is the bittul that Elikus radiates through us, and that bittul allows you to experience not just the highest levels of Ein Sof, but also Atzmus itself. Now you say that's a paradox. We just said Atzmus is beyond. Yes, but remember, God is also able to join these two forces together as long as we are ready. If we are refined enough, we can experience an Atzmus within us. It does not mean that we'll contain it like we contain Gvul. In other words, it won't be on our terms, it'll be on Atzmus terms, but there'll be a measure of Hasaga, because the mind at the end of the day was created by God too. So even though till now we've been discussing how Hasaga and mind is part of creation, and Atzmus is beyond the mind, but remember, who created the mind? It's like we say about Ein Sof. Ein Sof is infinitely distant from Atzmus. Atzmus did not need to radiate, did not need to express himself, does not need But once there is is me'ein hamar, because of its bittul, it reflects all of Atzmus. It's a complete, transparent channel for Atzmus, because it doesn't have an identity of its own. When we become, the yesh on earth becomes with the bittul of to the highest levels of it can begin to manifest even in a form of Hasaga, because Hasaga is also a form of divine Gilui. In other words, the Giluyim begin to express the Etzem. And that's what will be L'asad Love. That the Etzem will come out Begilui. Today, the Etzem is beyond us. And actually, as we'll soon learn, Maisa Mitzvahs, the Ish Pashut, the pauper that went to the king, actually can access the Etzem more than the aristocrat. Because the educated aristocrat only accesses primarily Giluyim. Where Ish Pashut, because he has no Giluyim, accesses Etzem. but you want the joining of the two. You want the etzem and the gili, and that will be la'asad laveh. So that's a few words about this topic. We've talked about it many, many times. We talked about it in Ayin Beis when he spoke about Baal Tshuva and a tzaddik. A Baal Tshuva touches the etzem more than a tzaddik does, like the pauper, because he came from darkness, because he comes from a much from a darker place. But at the end of the day, la'asavet tzaddikai b'tiyuf, the Mashiach, also la'asavet tzaddikai b'tiyuf, the Mashiach will also infuse tzaddikim with the power of tshuva. So the combination of etzem and gili, but that's only after the exerted effort, and I'm saying exerted, I mean in the fullest sense of the word, tremendous mesiras nefesh, and the challenges that we faced, and yes, the suffering that we faced, and the avodah that we've achieved through thousands of years in Golus and beyond. All that prepares us and prepares the world for an experience of etzem and gili. That's first I wasn't going to go explain, but I wanted to just say something. In other words, to give a little language around understanding that. But at this point, we're not there yet. We're at the verge, as the Rebbe says. We're at the threshold, about to be there, but it's not quite that level. But the contrast here, therefore, is between the aliyahs that are happening now. And the interesting is, if you don't go through the aliyahs of Gan Eden and the neshamas elevations on these levels that we're talking, where we come to recognize the awesome nature of the haflah, of the wonder of Atzmus, you'll never get to the la'asad laveh level to actually be able to perceive that haflah in a form of asagah. So it's actually interdependent, because you first have you need to have the bittul before you can go enter that inner sanctum. So enough said on that, and I'll stop for any questions.
So what does it mean that la'asi lavo in this lowest of worlds there'll be a revelation of Atzmus in Yemos Mashiach, where neshamas that are still living, like me or you, will be able to have some comprehension of Atzmus, even though we have no experience of Gan Eden and haven't had any of those aliyahs.
Who says we haven't? What do you mean? Every neshama on earth is firstly doing avodah right now and has aliyahs. Mm-hmm. Secondly, the neshamas that we have spent time in Gan Eden before they came to this world. Mm-hmm.
I say Jogolim. No, I understand. I hear you.
No, neshama. Yeah, that's not the point. Yeah.
Okay.
And then there's avodah, and then there's the cumulative avodah of all the generations.
Thank you.
Is this like what we discussed in Ayin Beis about the eyes? The same type of not reaction, but
yes. I mean,
transformation.
It connects that first we need to have an outside light. That's what you're referring to, I'm assuming, right? Like an outside light, because the eye cannot see in the dark. And that outside light is Torah, the malachim, the leaders, Einei Ha'eda. And then, once you have that outside light, it helps the eyes elevate to a point of etzem koyach hariyah, the Atzmus HaNeshama that can experience the etzem itself. Yeah, you can connect that directly to this.
Thank you.
I believe he even used that expression, ayin loy rasa, and Ayin Beis, which connects it to Samach Vav in that sense, yeah. So right now, when we talk about la'asad laveh, keep in mind, this is only language. We're talking about it. To actually experience it is a whole different story. Today we can experience, again, I go back to what I've said in previous classes, all this has to be translated to each one of us on our level. All this can be explained, can be experienced for each one of us. It's just, the Rebbe Rashab is speaking about it, he's giving us the general picture. But application comes now down to where do you stand? Where do you stand in your own aliyahs, in your own experience of the divine? I know most of us will say, I'm just a beginner. I'm just beginning the journey. It's true. That's fine. But it's still your journey. And it still has tremendous value. Because no one's asking you to do something someone else has to do. You need to do what you have to do. So we have to find, how can I translate these levels, commensurate levels of elevation, to non-commensurate, In other words, how do we, when is it like we're climbing, but we're like ad va'ad, one level leads us to the next. But then there are times we go out of our comfort zone, and there is an element of bittul, of the previous hasaga, where we have to divest and get out of a previous so-called perspective to assume a new perspective. And then, how does it affect our understanding of godliness that's beyond us? And the more you climb, the more you come to appreciate how distant, I say, how beyond the divine is, the wonder. And then, can you have a taste of La'asad Lavi today? Well, there's always Tayamer Chaim Zachu, there's always the idea of Me'ein Ha'ilam Haba, like we say, Hitimon Me'ein Ha'ilam Haba. They taste a piece of it. So I'm sure if you think about it, you can find a taste. I'm not going to say that we have Asaga and Atzmus exactly, but we are learning it in Chassidus, and there's a certain understanding that we have, even when it's completely beyond. So this again is the personalization that is difficult to do in a class because everyone here is a different place. So you have to think of this as general language. Think of this as the recipe, but then each of us have to bake our cake, and they're not going to come out exactly the same. I hope they come out edible, but they're not necessarily have to be the same. It just has to be your cake. You took these ingredients and now you've applied it to your personal life. If I can use such a, I guess, materialistic, mundane example. And now he goes back after this last parenthesis. He says now the following, at the bottom of page 26. V'zeu ayin lo yira'asa. Remember, if you skip the two parentheses, so now he's taking us back and says, and that's ayin lo yira'asa. That the ayin lo yira'asa, no eye can see, or has seen and can see. The b'chol haliyas achshav. Because all the ascents and elevations today, now, even the highest level souls, and we remember he mentioned earlier which they are. Kamoya Ovis or Moshe Rabbeinu Olav Shalom. The patriarchs Ovis and Moshe Rabbeinu Olav Shalom. It doesn't get higher than that. Next page, 27. In their multitude of and many elevations that they have experienced, higher and higher, without any limit and measure in Ein Sof, yet, nevertheless, lo higiu lebchinas reimus atzmus. They have not reached the level of reimus atzmus. So he's taking us back now to the experience itself. So, as high as they went, they didn't reach reimus atzmus. And the higher they went, obviously, they appreciated how wondrous, the awesome wonder, as I've been calling it, of Remus Atzmus. V'zeu ayin lo yira'asa elikim zulasecha. And that's the meaning of the verse, no eye has seen elikim, besides God. There's different ways to explain elikim zulasecha, but it means besides God, no eye has seen. The lo yodele bar ihu b'lechudoi. And now he brings, I believe, was this brought, I don't think he brought the Zayah earlier. That no person, the Zayah says, lo yodele bar ihu b'lechudoi. Nobody knows you as you are in your exclusive self. No one knows you as you are alone. And this level will be revealed the way it is in the truth of Atzmus Yizbarach, but Elam Haba is not talking about the future. L'neshamas begufim bizman atchiyah, to souls within bodies, the time of resurrection, tchiyas hamesim, shal ze amar yasel l'machaka le'davke. This is going to be a very critical statement that's going to be analyzed by the Rebbe Rashab in detail. That's why it says, Yasel l'machaka le'davke. He will prepare it This ayin le'rasa that an eye cannot see today, he will prepare it for those that machakale. What's the meaning of machakale? So literally it means for those that wait for him. That if you wait and you're patient enough, that's the simple meaning. But we're going to learn machaka is more than just waiting. Machaka is an avodah, and it's for that. That's where the ayin that today the eye does cannot see. Yasser l'machakale, he will provide it. He'll prepare it. He'll make it available, offer it to those that are machakale. We're going to learn later, soon actually, that machakale means yigia. Machaka goes from the yigia, the effort, the exertion, and avodas Hashem. Remember, the avodah malmata lamayla, la'ovda l'shamra. That how we work the garden from the bottom up. That avodah can achieve things that nothing else can achieve. That could achieve, like we learned in the first discourse in Samach Vav. Remember, we can learn the gili of Erdei Sof Lifnei Tzimtzum, but even higher Chodesh that even Lifnei Tzimtzum did not exist, because Nesava Kodesh Baruch, because Atzmus desired a dira b'tachtenim. So when we work hard and make a dira b'tachtenim, that's the only way that we can do something that the neshamas in Gan Eden cannot achieve, and that's what we're going to learn now. This is of course a central theme of Samach Vav. So in other words, Gan Eden, yes, there's bittul and levels, and the Aveda that we do on earth helps propel us in Gan Eden from one level to the next. Even the non-commensurate levels, ad v'lo to bligvul, and the bittul from one to the next, and deeper appreciation of Atzmus and the wonder. There's only one thing that can allow us to actually have a pnimius dikasaga, a type of internalized, integrated experience of Atzmus, that nothing in all the shtalshus can do, even higher than even Ein Sof itself, is when you fulfill the avodah of a dir b'tachtenim. The avodah, like he's going to explain, of an evet poshet, the simple pauper. Remember, the simple servant, without all the giluyim, but your simple dedication and absolute commitment through Kabbalah Seil and Yigia. Those are going to be the two operative terms. Kabbalah Seil, that you accept the yoke of heaven, and with the effort, the exertion that's only possible down here in this world with all its challenges. Gan Eden doesn't have these challenges, even though Gan Eden is great revelations. That is the only thing that actually allows us to actually have asaga, what he calls the gili of amitis atzmus be'elam hazel and neshamas begufim bizman atchiyah, and that's the ultimate future. So that happens because we are fulfilling the ultimate nesava kodesh baruch hu, the tainuga atzmi aposhet in atzmus of desiring a home in this lowest of worlds. So I'm giving a little taste of what's coming later, but that's the context of everything we've been learning. So a big elaboration about Gan Eden. By contrast, we can now understand the tremendous chiddush and the unprecedented innovation that will come through the Aveda below in reaching this highest level. These highest levels, I should say. Okay. Good. So I'm more or less going to stop here, but I just want to read the next line so you see the flow. And in order to arrive at this level that we're talking about, the Oineg Ha'atzmi, Eden, Ayin Le'rosa, not just a reflection of it, Zeu Aidei Maisa HaMitzvahs B'asiyah Gashmis Dafke. That's Dafke through the action of mitzvahs. And then he goes on, Kamayim Razal, Kol Yisrael, Yesh Lam Chelik Le'elam Haba, etc. And this also is where I mentioned that chat GPT that was posted on our group that said that through action you reach deeper than experience. Is the action in this world that reaches deeper than the experience of the divine in Gan Eden because of all this. But it's not instead of, it's in addition to, because you need Gan Eden, you need the Giluyim to go through all these levels before you actually reach this highest level. But that's why Yofa Sha'achaz B'tshuva Maisim Tevim B'elam Hazeh, we call what? Chaya Elam Haba. Now 1 hour of Tshuva Maisim Tevim in this world is more precious than the entire Chaya Elam Haba. Gan Eden for sure, even in a way Tchias HaMesim, simply because Tchias HaMesim is an outgrowth of our Yofasha Achas, Amaisim Tevim. But that's another discussion, not for now, right now. But the point being, it's more than Gan Eden, because it's the action that we do in this world. And I think here's a good place to stop, because the next section is like entering into a new zone. Not new zone completely, but he's going to start talking about Avodah, Seif Ma'aseh, Machshavah Tchila. So themes we've already discussed earlier. And if you go back, you'll see, before he got into Gan Eden, first he spoke about this, what we achieved through Avodah Sa'adam, at the end of the first Maimer. And then, page 10, 11, 12. And then on page 14, he began to understand that. He said to understand the Tosfos Eidos Shenasma Adei Torah Mitzvos. I'm looking at page 14 now. Yesh lahagdim mashakos of ayin leirasa. So if you really want to connect the dots, the flow. So what started on page 14, after talking about the Torah Mitzvos in this world, he's now returning to that after this, I guess the last 12 pages about Gan Eden and about all the revelations. And now fittingly, he's going back to the point of how we achieve this level of Ayin Rei Rasa through our Avodah. I'm going to stop here. The floor is yours. Any questions? If there are any.
I have a question. Well, it's a little tangential, but it's Dafka on the point of Ayin Lo Rasa. You mentioned that the Rebbe Shab discusses this in Ayin Base. This is, you said that in response to Robin's question about the Siwa. But in Ayin Base, he's discussing the pasuk Ayin Lo Rasa in connection with the Helam Ha'atzmi. So it's not about Giluim. So, I mean, it seems like
Here it's also not Giluim. Giluim don't reach that level. Giluim in Gan Eden and the highest levels, it eludes them. Ayin Lo Rasa is Helam Ha'atzmi. He said it here too, by the way, in Samach Vav earlier.
Yeah.
He said it's the level that is beyond any Gili. I think he mentioned Helam Ha'atzmi explicitly.
Yeah?
Yeah. I think it was on, I remember pointing it out. Yeah. But look, I think it's somewhere on after page 14, maybe 15 or something like that.
I'll look for it.
Yeah. And it's on Ayin Lo Rasa means Helam. It means you can't see it.
It's on 14, in the bottom, second to last line of 14.
Okay.
Yeah. Yeah.
She's selling some B'chin Helam Ha'atzmi, yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
Remember, once you talk in the Osid Love, in the ultimate level, Helam and Gili will be joined together. They'll be the revelation of Atzmus. Atzmus is even higher than Helam Ha'atzmi. So, Helam Ha'atzmi...
It has to be that way. Yeah, I hear you. But in that sense, my prior question about the difference between Atzmus and Shmo HaGadol does involve the notion of Helam Ha'atzmi, because Atzmus
Shmo HaGadol is not Helam Ha'atzmi. Shmo HaGadol is Or Ein Sof.
I get it, because Shmo it's a handle, it's expression. I was saying what's above expression is the lack of, is God's capacity not to reveal. Right?
Well, right now he's not really analyzing Helam Ha'atzmi. He's talking about Shmo HaGadol, talked about the Giluim of Ein Sof. And just for the record, Shmo HaGadol, some places may also refer to Helam Ha'atzmi, if I recall correctly, in Ayin Beis. But he's not going into that here.
Mm-hmm.
So what are you asking? I mean, are we talking mechanics here or Havana? What are you asking me exactly? What's are we addressing? We're addressing Giluyim of Ein Sof. He does Ayin Lo Rasa. He does associate with Helam Ha'atzmi. We're addressing Atzmus. That's beyond everything. So.
No, I don't have any specific.
You asked me if it's being all addressed, more or less. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just trying to close the circle. That's all. I don't have any specific question.
Okay. He's not analyzing here Helam Ha'atzmi in detail. he refers to it as Ein Le Rasa. Yes, whatever you know about Helam Atzmi can be applied, as I told Robin in Robin's answer, to this because he does mention it. And Ein Le Rasa by definition means Helam Atzmi, means no eye can see. Period. It's
Correct.
unseeable.
It's
And yet that itself will be revealed, which he says in 9 base too. Now, what that means to reveal the unrevealable or to see the unseeable is a discussion which we had in 9 base, and we'll discuss it here too. That's why it's so important to understand that it's coming through the Avodah in this world. It's not coming through Giluyim. Gan Eden will never get to Helam Atzmi because Gan Eden doesn't associate with Helam, it associates with Gilui. It's like a tzaddik will not associate, tzaddik is relates more to Gan Eden, a ben more to Giluyim, an eved more to etzem. One of the aspects of etzem is that it's behelam.
Yeah.
Okay. Initially, that is. Okay.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah. Good.
I don't want to jump I don't want to jump the gun, but I think you just teased us with the next line, the next paragraph. We haven't quite reached a clear explanation of how our maisim in this world, our performance of observance of mitzvahs here.
You
actually,
see how big this sefer is?
Yeah.
That's going to take all these pages are going to talk about that.
Okay.
And he began. We already in the first mimer, at the end of the first mimer, he spoke about it. Now he's going to go a little more. We'll see how it goes. I'm very patient.
Okay, shkoyach. Thank you.
Okay. Are there any other questions?
I have a question once the the recording goes off because it doesn't really enhance what you spoke about today.
Okay. I will. So let's stop here, unless there's anybody else wants to say something relating directly. If not, I will stop here. End of the line 3 on page 27. So let's stop.